All right, David, you hear me all right on Zoom? Excellent, thank you. All right, I will say good morning and a good Chodesh to everyone. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, to thank Avraham and Shaindy Kelman for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this month in memory of their parents. Zichrono L'Bracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the family ein chama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Shmuel and Shira Artman, for dedicating the shiurim this week in honor of the birth of a baby girl to Jesse and Rivka Meirovitz. And we thank our Daf Yomi sponsor this morning, Iris Miller, in honor of Chodesh Elul and Ed's 50th birthday. So if you see, when you see Azriel walk in, make sure to wish him a very hearty mazel tov. And also, Iris sponsor, there's some mazonos for breakfast, the Mirz on the Chabad Rosh Chodesh, and the birthday for after davening. Mazel tov, we should all be zochim Meretz Hashem to reach beautiful milestones in life. So, with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. We are, again, it's very exciting because, as I mentioned yesterday, we're going through all the sugyas now of the Daled Minim. Now, the truth is, it would be wonderful to be able to spend a couple of days on each of these sugyas. But what I'll do is, I sent out, the Daf Yomi pictures. I'll send out also a little bit later on today. Today we're actually focusing on Hadassin. Today is everything you ever wanted to know about Hadassin. And Meretz Hashem we're going to focus on today. I'll send out that copy from the Sefer that I quoted to you from yesterday, the Lulav and Esrik handbook, although I will tell you it's Kedai. I didn't check yesterday if they sell it here locally, but I'm sure you can pick up a copy, and it's exceptionally Kedai. Small book, Lulav and Esrik handbook, put out by Art Scroll, all of the various halachas. So with that, let us begin. Mishnah, today's daf is Lamed Gimel 33. We are picking up at the Mishnah on Lamed Beis Amid Beis. Hados Hagozl v'hayavish pasal. So if you'll notice again, by the way, these Mishnayos stylistically follow the same pattern. So that which we started by Lulav is going to be echoed through the rest of the Daled Minim as well. So Hados Hagozl v'hayavish. If you have a stolen Hados or a dried up Hados, ultimately again it is pasal. It is pasal. The Mishnah goes on. Shalashira v'shal irani dachas. What happens if you have a Hados branch of an Asherah or of an Nidachas? Remember again, Asherah is a particular type of tree which was worshipped for Avodah Zarah, or Nidachas is a city where the entire city has worshipped Avodah Zarah and therefore has been condemned. Pasal. Such a Hados ultimately is going to be pasal. Nikdam Rosho. What happens if the top of the Hados was snipped off? The top of the branch was snipped off. Nifritzu alav, or the leaves of the Hados fell off. Oshahayu anavav merubos me'alav, or it's actually interesting, Hadassim could sprout berries. Let's say there are more berries than leaves. Ultimately, again, pasal. So we'll say those are three psulim right there. Top of the Hados is snipped off. Leaves of the Hados fell off, or more berries than leaves. All of these are pasal. V'miatan kasher. Now, this is actually very interesting by Hados. So if you have a Hados that has more berries than leaves, ultimately the Hados is pasal. But you could remedy the Hados how? By removing the berries. However, ve'ein mema'atin b'yamtiv. But you can't remove berries on yamtiv. This is very interesting. Why can't you remove berries on yamtiv? So we'll discuss why this is. But remember, you would think that it's kotzer, right? That it's harvesting. It's not harvesting. Why is it not harvesting? Right? It's already detached from the ground, right? The malacha of katsira is oker davar mimakom gidulo, uprooting something from where it grows, assuming that it has the capacity to grow. It's detached from the ground already. It's actually an issue of tikkun maneh. It's actually an issue of fixing an item. The act of fixing or rectifying an item on Shabbos or Yom Tov is a malacha, or I should say is a prohibition. The nature of the malacha is subject to some level of dispute. But in any event, so you could remedy it but you can't remedy it on Yom Tiv. Now, I'll tell you something interesting over here, just specifically about Niktam Rosho. We'll talk about this in this Gemara, but I don't want to forget to mention it because it's actually very common. Niktam Rosho, if you notice, by the way, often Hadassim, the upper leaves extend usually above the branch. When it says the top of the hadas was cut off, that's a reference to the branch on top, not a reference to the leaves on top. So if you have leaves that grow above the branch and those leaves are cut, that does not automatically invalidate the hadas. If the top of the branch is cut, that's where you're going to have that psul. But we'll see in the Gemara. So Tanrabanim. So we'll say first thing we're going to focus on over here is, remember, the incredibly intriguing part of the Daled Minim is the fact that with the exception of like the Aravas, the Torah is not explicit about what these items are, right? Kapos Tamarim, even yesterday, again in yesterday's daf, Kapos Tamarim, which means the lulav, which again kind of sounds a little bit explicit because Tamarim means date tree, date palm, but Lamaisa, which part of the date palm we saw was shrouded in Machlokes yesterday's daf. Pre-Eitzad, we didn't get to Esrog yet, but already it was alluded to. What fruit is that? What fruit is that? Arvei Nachal seems to be a bit more explicit that it's referring to willow branches. So now the Gemara is going to say, by the way, the way the Torah refers to Hadassim, to what we call myrtle branches, is Anaf Eitz Avos. Anaf Eitz Avos. So turn Rabbanan. Anaf Eitz Avos. They will say, let's define that term for just a moment. What does it mean? Anaf means what? A branch. Eitz, tree. Avos. What's avos? Now, avos could be ava, like of, thick, or we're going to see what it means really is woven together, or the truth is the English word that's often used is plated. Plaitted, which is the same idea as woven, which means leaves that are very tight together and one on top of the other. So the Gemara says, so anaf eitz avos, so sha'anafiv chovenes eitzo. It's referring to leaves which cover the branch, or cover in this case the stalk. Ve'izahu, what is this? Haviomer zehados. I would say this is a hados. This is what we identify as hadassim, myrtle branches. Maybe it's an olive branch, but avos v'leka. Olive branches don't have the same level of plating or interwoven kite, right? As a it's a new word, by the way. As myrtle branches do. Maybe it's referring to a chestnut branch, but enough of chofenes eitzo v'leka. Same idea. The leaves of a chestnut branch do not go ahead and cover the stalk as much as a hadas does. Ve'ima hirduf. Say this is hirduf. Say this is hirduf. Now, we'll say Rashi points out hirduf is just the type kimin kaliyas suyan alav. Rashi doesn't identify what it is. Say it's hirduf. Amar Abaye teracheha darchinom v'leka. We'll say this is beautiful. Abaye says the ways of the Torah are pleasant, and this is lacking. Apparently, the hirduf has some type of thorn-like protrusion. So therefore, it can't be that the Torah Kedosha would tell me to take something that is thorn-like. Rava says from here, ha'emes v'shalom ahevu. The pasuk says literally again, peace, or I should say truth and peace, love one another, come together. Now, interestingly enough, the hirduf, apparently Rashi points out, has contained some type of poison. This is machlokes. Is it poison for people? Is it poison for animals? So ultimately, Rava says it's impossible that the Torah Kedosha would tell us to take something that is poisonous. It will say there's something very beautiful that's contained in this, which is, remember, the power of the Daled Minim. The power of the Daled Minim is that they represent different parts, not just of the body, but different parts of the Jewish persona. Right? If you look at the Daled Minim, you could see all of the midos that a Jew is supposed to possess and things that a Jew aren't supposed to possess. And you learn many incredible things, like don't be a prickly person. Don't be a prickly person. Don't be a thorny individual, right? We'll say sometimes we're in a bad mood about different things, so there's upset about different things. Remember, klape chutz, how you feel on the inside, that's your reshus hayochid. That's your reshus hayochid. In your reshus hayochid, you're entitled to feel however you want. In your reshus harabim, which is your face, which is your demeanor, which is your interactions. Diracheha darchi noam v'chol nesivo seh shalom. Hashalom va'emes ahevu. An obligation to put the right foot forward, put a pleasant countenance, have mekabeles kol adam b'sever panim yafos. When we interact with the world, when we interact with each other, forging harmonious relationships within our communities, within our people, within the greater world, so incredibly important. The Torah would never tell you to take a prickly hadas because Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to be a prickly individual. Torah would never tell you to go ahead and take something that possesses poison, because at the end of the day, Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be pleasant and good and sweet people. So much about our personalistic success is rooted in the nature of the calming and sweet midos we possess as well. An incredible yisur. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Anaf Eitz Avos. What does Anaf Eitz Avos refer to? Eitz Shetam Eitzo Upirio Shava. It refers to the type of branch where ultimately, again, the tree and the leaf, or the pri, taste the same. Havi Omer Zehadas. So apparently, again, I guess the myrtle branches, I don't know if you guys, you could try this, right? The leaf and the branch both have a similar taste. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tana, Eitz Avos Kasher, V'She'eno Avos Pasol. Now, I'll say, interestingly enough, therefore, for the Hadas, it has to have this avos quality, right? The avos quality ultimately is what? Is that plated, woven quality, where the leaves literally are one on top. So I'll say, if you notice, by the way, how does this manifest itself? How does this plating manifest itself? When the hadas looks the way it does, you really don't see the branch, right? It's closed over there. I just want to point out something amazing. You know what do the hadassim represent in the body of the person? What do the hadassim represent? The eyes. So I'll say, you know what the incredible message is? It's a din in shmiras ha'inayim. You see, the eyes, the way the eyes are situated on the branch is that the eyes cover the branch. So much of success, right, with Jewish eyes is to know when they should be open and to know when they should be closed. What I should be looking at and what I shouldn't be looking at. But it's not just about like looking at illicit things. It's also sometimes recognizing that, Rabbi Nachman says, why do we close our eyes when we say Shema? How do we close our eyes when we say Shema? Because sometimes you see the clearest when your eyes are closed. Because sometimes in life you have to know that what you see is not necessarily the truth. And what you perceive is not necessarily the way things are. Sa'alt shmiras ha'inayim, sometimes again in the world of morality, a Jew has to know that sometimes your eyes have to be closed. They can't always be open to everything. And sometimes in life, just recognizing what I see is not necessarily what the real MS is. Sometimes you actually have to keep your eyes closed in order to be able to see the truth in life. An incredible yisod. So the Gemara goes right there. Hechidami avos. What's avos? Amar Yehuda. The Rebbe say, here is probably one of the most important halachos when it comes to adasim. What does it mean that it's avos? It means that there are 3 leaves which come out of each base. Now the truth is, you could see this picture in the sheet I sent out in yesterday's daf. So it's actually the sheet that's marked Lamed Beis Amud Beis. Well, that's where we are. Lamed Beis Amud Beis. So if you notice, it's picture 167. So you see this picture over here of 3 hadassim, 3 leaves coming out of what looks like one base. 3 leaves, picture 167, 3 leaves coming out of one base. Now again, you notice each leaf has its own, I don't know what the proper horticultural term is over here, but it has its own zach. It has its own thing that it comes out of, but they're all aligned on the same level. Rav Kahana says, no, even if not all 3 are coming out exactly on the same level, even 2 and 1, that's picture 168. So if you notice, again, the difference between 167 and 168 is in 167, all 3 leaves are exactly aligned. In 168, you have 2 aligned and 1 at a little bit of a different level. Afilu trei v'chad. Ravacha brei Rava Mahadir atrei v'chad. So listen to this. Ravacha, the son of Rava, used to dafka go after this type of hadas that didn't have all 3 leaves aligned, but rather had a 2 and 1 setup, Why? Because listen to this. Rav Acha's Rebbe was Rav Kahana. So once Rav Kahana said that such a hadas like this, we'll call it the 2-and-1 hadas, is kosher, Rav Acha Dafka went after that type of hadas. Amrlei Mar Bar Amemar Ravashi, but Mar Bar Amemar said to Ravashi, Abba, my father Amemar, lahu hadas shote karile. My father Amemar used to call that type of hadas a hadas shote, a fool hadas. Why? Because just like a fool, Rashi says, just like a fool, a drunk, can't walk straight, so too that hadas can't get its act together, right? It can't get all 3 leaves on one level. That's called the hadas shota. That's called the fool's hadas. And I both say, just to point out, this is an incredibly important halach in Hilchos Hadasim. We paskin that ideally you would want a hadas that looks like page 160, picture 167, where all three leaves come out on the same level. What happens if you have this 2-and-1 setup? So this is a machlokis in halacha, whether or not a 2-and-1 setup works. We have 2 leaves coming out of the same level and 1 at a little bit of a different level. The way the majority of poskim come out is, as long as when you look at the 3, because remember again, the hadassim we use usually have a bank of 3 leaves. There are hadassim that have more than 3 leaves, but if you have hadassim that have 3 leaves at each level, as long as when you look at it, it looks like they're all on the same level, that's kosher. That's kosher. Ideally, you would want that which you have in picture 167, where literally, again, all 3 are mamish on the same exact level. As long as, but again, if you don't have that, as long as they look on the same level, that's good enough. If, however, you have a situation where there's a discernible difference, 2 that are clearly on one level, and the 3rd that is just higher or lower, clearly higher or lower, that is called a hadas shota, and such a hadas is not kosher for use for the daled minim. Interesting halacha to know. If the majority of the leaves fell off and some of the leaves remained on, kosher. It's kosher as long as the plating, right, the woven kite remains intact. Gemara says that makes no sense. Kosher. Doesn't make any sense. You just told me if the majority of the leaves fall off, it's kosher, as long as the branch, the hadas branch, retained its plating, right? Its wovenness. But I don't say if the majority of the leaves fell off, then how does it maintain its wovenness? To which the Gemara says, Amar Abaye mishkachos la top of lam and gimel ba'asa mitzra. So it's very interesting. This can be found in what we call a boundary hadas, a hadas that grows on the boundary. So this is interesting. So people sometimes have hadasim, and they would use them as boundary markers. Now, interestingly enough, Rashi points out over here, you're usually not planting anything else on the boundary. And therefore, again, the hadas gets the benefit of all of the earth's nutrients, so you would grow some more robust hadasim by the boundary. Those hadasim would often have up to 7 leaves on each level, right? 7 leaves on each level. Now, in a case like that, the kaimi shiva b'chadkina, they would sprout 7 leaves on each level. The chinatri arba. So if the majority of those leaves fall out, right, which would be 4, how many are you left with? Pashlu tlasa. So that could be a case, interestingly enough, where what? Where the majority of the leaves fall out, but we'll call the plating, right? The wovenness is still intact. Very interesting. Amr Abaye says, Shmamina Hai Asamatra Kasha Lahoshana. Abaye says, by the way, we just happen to learn a secondary halacha, which is that you could use a boundary hadas, ultimately, again, for the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, for Oshanas. So Pshita, Gemara says, okay, like what exactly is the chiddush in that? You might have thought that because it has another name. In other words, both say, maybe when the Torah says, Anaf Eitz Avos, it means something that is only known simply as what? As Anaf Eitz Avos, as a hadas. But anything that's known as a separate name, perhaps that's not kosher for use. Kamashma, that's not the case. Kamashma, even though it has a Shem Levi, a nickname, right? Another name, it's still kosher for use. Ve'ima hachinami. So maybe not. Maybe you're right. Maybe because it's known not simply as an asa, but an asa mitzra, as a boundary hadas, maybe it's not fit for use. Eitz avos amrachmana mikomakom. The Torah says eitz avos, and therefore again that term is an inclusive one. Anything that is in the hadas family, even if it has another name, like in this case, this hadas is not just known as a regular hadas, but it's known as what? It's known as what? A boundary hadas. Nevertheless, it is kosher for use. Tan Rabbanan, Yav Shurov Alav Vinish Arubo Shlosha Bade Alin Lachin kosher. So say what happens if the majority of the leaves on the hadas dried up, but you're left with 3 badim. Now, both say 3 badim means a bad is like a bank. We'll call it a bank, right? So remember again, the minimum number of leaves you have in order to satisfy the avos criteria, the plating, right, or the woven kite criteria is 3. 3. That's what you need on level. So now what the Gemara is saying over here is as follows. If the majority of the leaves fell off, but you are left with ultimately what? Shlosha bade alin, 3 banks of leaves that are lachin, that are moist, kosher. And that is true only if what? If halacha l'maisa, it's on the top of the branch. So if you are left with 3 banks of moist leaves on the top of each branch, that is going to be good. Now we'll see the halacha l'maisa, actually how this pans out. We already saw in yesterday's daf that in reality our shiurim is for lulav I need 4 tefachim. For hadasim and aravos, I need 3 tefachim. What essentially we're going to see is for the hadas, we'll get to aravos tomorrow, but at least for hadasim, you want the majority of that branch covered, plated. Now what that means again for hadasim is you want the majority of that branch to have the banks of 3 leaves, ideally exactly on even, what's the right wording? On even footing, it's not the right word, footing, you understand? On an even level with each other. But again, we're talking about halacha l'maisa, even if they're not exactly equal, as long as when you look at it, it looks equal, or it looks the same, that is going to be good enough. Again, we're going to develop this more. Niktam rosho, what happens if the top of the branch is snapped off, right, or is cut off? So the Mishnah said that the particular branch is pasul. Tani ula barchinina, niktam roshova also botamra kosher. Interesting. What happens if the top of the branch is cut off and a tamra? I will say tamra literally means a date sprouts on top. Now, of course, this doesn't literally mean a date. It means some type of bud-like or even fruit-like or berry-like. In other words, if the top of the branch is cut off and something grows there, what the Gemara calls a date, a growth, a fruit, a berry, something. So then ultimately, again, that'll make the hadas kosher. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, apparently, the problem when the top of the branch is snapped off or snipped off is a lack of hiddur, a lack of beauty. Once something grows back on top there, the hiddur is restored. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, this is a fascinating sugya. Niktam rosh erev yamtiv, va'also botam Rabbi Yamtiv mahu. What about the following case? I have my hadas branch. The top of the branch gets snapped off on erev yamtiv, and what happens? The bud grows back on yamtiv itself. Is the hadas now kosher for use? Mahu. Yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs olo. So we'll say this becomes now, we've had this sugya before. And I find this so interesting. Yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs, which Rabbi say means what? Means what? When something is rejected, right? Nidcha means rejected, set aside. When something is rejected from mitzvah use, is that rejection permanent? Or do we say once the qualifying factor that created that rejection kite is removed, that the item is once again reinstated for use? That's the shaila of yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs. Look at Rashi just a moment. Yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs, kilomar nohages taras dichui eitzel mitzvahs, kishem shenohages eitzel karbanos. V'mira v'nitcha mishenishcheta, amris yidcha desulo hadr chazi. Hachinami ho v'nitcha kisheniktam sulo hadr mechsi ba'aliyas tamra v'ashtalo daik bein dachi mekarbos. Listen to this. Where does everyone agree that dichui applies? Interestingly enough, in the realm of karbanos. So, for example, if you have a carbon that was shechted, and that carbon became disqualified for whatever the reason, even if that disqualification is remedied, the carbon does not revert back to its original kosher use. So everyone will agree. Again, we're not talking about an animal that was designated and is alive, right? We're talking about an animal that was shechted, it was rejected, and then let's say again it was reinstated to its former state. Once it's nidcha, once it's set aside for non-use, that remains its state. So we'll say, so here's the shaila. What do we say by a hados? The hados was disqualified because the top was snipped off on Erev Yom Tiv. Now on Yom Tiv, the date, well, I'm going to use the word date. The date grows on top of it. Is it set back? Is it reinstated for use or not? So the Gemara says, the tiv shot le mehadisnan. Let's go ahead and solve that question from here, from the Mishnah. This nanabos, so listen to this. Bakisi adam kiso v'niskale potter milachasos. Also, we know that when you shecht a bird or a chaya, a non-domesticated animal, there is a mitzvah of kisei adam, to cover the blood. Cover the blood. So let's say I shechted my non-domesticated animal. I shechted a deer, right? And now what happens? Kiso v'niskala. I covered the blood, but then the wind blew and uncovered the blood. Pater milachasos. You're not chayiv again to recover it. In other words, once you covered it once, if the wind came along and blew off the dirt, you don't have to recover it. What about kiso haruach? What happens if I shechted, and before I got a chance to cover the blood, the wind blew the dirt and went ahead and covered the blood? What happens in that situation? Chayiv lechasos. I am obligated to go out of my way to go ahead and still cover the blood. That's only true if what? If I shechted, the wind blew the dirt onto the blood, and then what? The wind blew the dirt off the blood. Now I'm chayiv still to go ahead and perform the mitzvah of kisui. But if you shecht and the wind blows dirt onto the blood, and what? That dirt is still there. There's no mitzvah of kisui. And we asked about that. Even if the wind, so we'll say if I shechted and the wind blew the dirt onto the blood, and then the wind blew the dirt off the blood, why am I chayiv to go ahead and recover the blood? Hoil v'idchi. Why don't we say, once I was unable to perform the mitzvah, once the mitzvah, so to speak, was performed, once it was done, once I was unable to perform it, it should be forever done. In other words, once the blood was covered by the wind, then at the end of the day, doesn't that obviate the mitzvah? Rav Papa says, what do you see from here? You see from here that the concept of dichui, or called mitzvah rejection, is only a din by karbanas, is not a din by mitzvahs, which Rabbi means as follows: that if halacha l'maisa, you have a mitzvah, and for some reason something happened which precluded you from performing the mitzvah or prevented the mitzvah from being done, if that we'll call it rejection factor is removed, the mitzvah once again is reinstated. Again, so for example, I go ahead, I shecht, there's blood, I have to cover the blood, then what happens? The wind comes along, blows earth onto the blood is covered, and now the earth goes ahead, and so now I have no mitzvah to perform, obviously the blood is covered. If the wind comes along and then blows off the dirt, now I have the mitzvah of kisei adam, which shows you, ain't dichui eitzah mitzvahs, that their mitzvahs are not permanently rejected. So the Rapapa gufa mi boile. So the Rapapa gufa mi boile. Mevshat pashet le de'in dichui eitzah mitzvahs. Lo shna lekula, but no shna lechumra. Ol dilma sapuki misapkile lechumra aminan lekula lo aminan. But I said no. Rav Papa was actually asking a kasha. Rav Papa actually wasn't sure. Rav Papa was asking, is it clear? Does everyone agree that ein dichui eitzah mitzvahs, that mitzvahs are quote unquote never rejected, whether that yields a stringency or a leniency, or do we say we're mesupak, and therefore again it will rule lechumra but not lekula? So we'll say, so for example, what that means is, so the Gemara's, Rav Papa wasn't sure. Rav Papa, because he wasn't sure, maybe what we'll do is in the case of kisei adam, so once the wind comes along and removes the dirt, we'll make you recover it because that's the chumrah. But maybe in the case of the hadas, maybe we say, once the top was lopped off, that's it. That hadas is gone. Even if the bud goes ahead and grows back, halacha l'maisa, once the hadas was set aside for non-use, we don't let you use this. Maybe we'll say ein dichui l'chumra, but we won't say it l'kula. To which the Gemara says teku. So we'll say, so from Rav Papa, it's not clear. Do we say yesh dichui eitzel mitzvahs or ein dichui eitzel mitzvahs? So we'll see here. This is a sodistic, fundamental machlokes. Fundamental machlokes. At the end of the day, when you are precluded from, see, we'll say there's two parts to this. What we're asking is, once an object becomes set aside and is no longer usable for its intended mitzvah purpose, if the factor which caused it to be set aside is removed, does the item revert back to its original state? Or do we say, pretty much, once you're rejected from your particular mitzvah purpose, you are rejected? To which the Gemara says, maybe this is machlokes tanoim. Listen to this. So the Gemara says, avar v'likdan pasal. Remember again, if you went above, we saw before in the Mishnah that if your hadas sprouts too many berries, you can go ahead and pick them off. But you can't pick them off on Yom Tiv. On Yom Tiv. What happens if you picked it up on Yom Tiv? So the Gemara says, live avar v'likdan pasal. The hadas is still going to be pasal. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok. V'cham decham machshir. Chacham say ultimately again that Allah l'maisa the hadas will be kosher, even if you went ahead and you did something asur, like pick off the berries on Yom Tiv. So the Gemara says. By the way, Rashi says over here, Avar Velikton. Rashi says, Li'inove for the Li'inove hados. You picked up the berries of the hados. Shem Rubin me'alin. V'tnan imiyatan kasher ve'imamat v'yantav. Mishum shvus shedome limitakin kli umachshiro. What's wrong with picking off the berries on Yom Tiv? It's tikkun maneh. You're fixing something. You're fixing something, and the act of fixing something resembles a malacha. Okay, so what happened? You're not supposed to do it on Yom Tov, but you did it. You did it. Rabbi Eliezer says it's pasal. The Chachamim say it's kosher. Savrua decholi amalulav ein tzarich eged. So let's analyze this machlokes. Let's assume for a moment everyone agrees that there is no obligation to bind the lulav. Now what that means is to bind the lulav together with the adasim and the arabas. And if you want to say ultimately that there is an obligation to bind it, lo yalfinon lulav misukkah. We do not learn out the halachos of lulav from sukkah. Dichsiv bei tasa v'lo mina asui. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, we learned this extensively that by sukkah there is a mitzvah of tasa v'lo mina asui, which means that when you place your schach onto the sukkah, it must be schach that is ready to operate in a kosher capacity. You can't go ahead and put schach in a sukkah on a way where the schach is invalid or the sukkah is invalid, and then ex post facto, you do something afterwards to retroactively make everything kosher. That's called tasav l'mina asui. So the Gemara says, "My love b'hakamiflagi." What are they arguing about? Demand the pasal savar minan yesh dichos mitzvos. The one who says that if you picked the berries off on Yom Tiv, the hadas is pasal, he holds because yesh dichos eitzel mitzvos. Uman de machshir savar lo amrinan yesh dichos eitzel mitzvos. And the one who says that the hadas will be kosher holds that what? Ein dichos eitzel mitzvos. To which the Gemara says, "Lo, everyone agrees that we do not say that an object is forever rejected lagabe a mitzvah." What's the machlokes over here? The meilaf lulav misukah kamiflagi. Here the machlokes is, do we learn out the halachos of lulav from sukkah? Mar savar yalfinon lulav misukah. One says we learn out lulav from sukkah, and therefore again, just like sukkah has a din of what? Tasa v'lo mina asui, so too lulav has a din of tasa v'lo mina asui, which also means what? They just understand the mental image over here. You have your lulav, your adasim, and your arabas all bound together. All bound together. There's only one problem. You didn't realize this, but when you put your adasim in, they have more berries than leaves. So now what do you want to do? No problem. What do you want to do? Pluck them off. They're both saying, now it turns out that what? You have made your bundle kosher, but what? Kind of ex post facto. Taseh v'lo mina asui. So the Gemara says, one opinion, so the opinion, Ma'ashav yafina lo misukah, u'ma'ashav lo yafina lo misukah. So maybe the machlokes in Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is whether or not you learn out lulav from sukkah. In other words, is there a din of taseh v'lo mina asui by lulav, just like there is by sukkah? That's the machlokes. Another possibility is if you hold that a lulav has to be bound, everyone will agree that you learn out lulav from sukkah. The truth is, here the machlokes is, does a lulav need to be bound? They both say this is the ongoing machlokes, right? The ongoing machlokes. is there an obligation to go ahead and bind lulav or not? That's the fundamental. Elul's here, right? Baal Takia is here. Sometimes the presence of the Baal Takia does even more than the call of the shofar. But, okay, so Gemara says as follows: This Sanya, lulav bein agud or bein she'ena agud kasher. A lulav, whether it's bound or it's not bound, is going to be kasher. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, agud kasher she'ena agud pasel. Whether ultimately, again, if it's agud, if it's bound, it's kasher. If it's not agud, it's pasel. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda's logic? Yalif lekicha me'agudas ezov. Both say Rabbi Yehuda learns that interesting from where? From Pesach. From Pesach. Now both say it's talking about the hyssop bundle. Where is there a hyssop bundle by Pesach? Where is the hyssop bundle by Pesach? Only by Pesach Mitzrayim. Remember, only by the first Pesach, there was an obligation to go and smear the blood of the current Pesach on the doorpost. But I just want to point out, this is beautiful. Why is this beautiful? Why is this beautiful? It's beautiful because this extends the Gzeir Shavav Tesvav. Remember again, there's already this linkage between Pesach and Sukkot. Chamisha Asar, that teaches me that just like matzah on the first night of Pesach is going to be a daraisa, so too Sukkah on the first night is also going to be a daraisa. Now we're extending it even more. It says Ezov lekachtem lachem agudas Ezov, a bundle of hyssop. You can't just take one hyssop. First of all, no one ever likes to take one hyssop. Once you get one, you can't stop. Right? You take a whole bundle of hyssop by the current Pesach. So to what? Just like by the hyssop, it had to be a bundle. Afkan aguda. So too by lulav, it has to be a bundle as well. They're both saying, now what does that mean? Just seeing what we're talking about over here. Everyone is agreeing that when you take your daled minim, how are you taking them? You're taking in your hand the lulav, the adasim, the aravas. What does it mean? Does it require bundling? What it means is you have to tie it together or not. That's the shaila. No one's disagreeing. So you take them together. The shaila is, do you have to bundle them together? So ultimately, again, Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, we learn it out from the bundle by Karban Pesach. So it's just like over there, lekachtem by Ha'agudas Ezov means a bundle, so too it means a bundle. So the Rabbanon, less lekicha. The Rabbanon don't subscribe to this Gzeir Shava. Okay? So both say fundamental machlokes by lulav. Man tar lutan Rabbanon, lulav mitzvah la'agdo. It is a mitzvah to go out and bundle the lulav. Ve'im lo agdo kasher. But if you didn't bundle it and you just held everything together, it's still kasher. Whose opinion is this? Money. Rabbi Yehuda kilo agdo amai kasher. Can't be Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that the mitzvah is to bundle it together. Rabbanon, my mitzvah kab. And if it's Rabbanon, the Rabbanon say you don't require bundling. Ultimately, again, so what does it mean it's a mitzvah? The Olam Rabbanon. Really, it is the Rabbanon. Even the Rabbanon who say you don't have to bundle would say that what? It's a good thing to bundle. Why not? Mishum zekeli va'anvehu. Ultimately, you're going to say because why? Because bundling the daled minim beautifies the mitzvah. And I both say, I want to devote significant time to this, but I'm just going to tell you this right now. This is how he passed now. This is how the Shulchan Aruch passes halacha l'maisa. Namely, that if you did not bundle the daled minim together and you just took everything in your hand, you are yotzei. But Hiddur mitzvah says that you should bundle it. Hiddur mitzvah says you should bundle it. Now, how you should bundle it is an interesting discussion amongst the poskim. So by Ashkenazim, we often use the whole holster contraption. By the Sfardim, you'll often find they do not like using this holster contraption, but instead actually just bind the minim together and take the minim by hand. That's a whole further discussion, which in Meretz Hashem we're going to get into when we actually make it to Amud Beis one of these days in Daf Yomi. So the Gemara goes right there. Again, I just keep them on the list. When we do our halacha l'maisa shir, we're going to focus on that piece as well. I just want to point out just how incredible it is, and we really have to go on. We just did on Rosh Chodesh Elul, Aleph Elul, the machlokes of Yesh Dichoy Eitzel Mitzvos, which is the machlokes of when something is rejected, does it remain forever in its rejected state? Which I will say, isn't that the quintessential shaila of tshuva? I've done so many things in my year, so many things in my life that would cause me to be rejected from the Ribono Shel Olam, that would cause me to be rejected mimichitzaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so the shaila is that rejection something permanent or not? However we go ahead and we rule halachically, one thing is clear, which is hashkafically, we hold ein dichui etzel mitzvahs. There's no such thing as a permanent state of rejection. There's no such thing as a Jew, no matter what I've done or what I haven't done, no matter how severe, never chas v'shalom a situation where I've done something that causes me to be irreversibly rejected. Tshuva is always possible. Coming home is always possible. Losing myself in the protective embrace of the Ribbon Shalom is always possible. Ein dichui etzel mitzvahs, ein dichui etzel a Jew. The Gemara goes weiter. O shahayu anav of merubin, or if there are too many berries. Amar Rav Chisda, davar zeh Rabbeinu Agado amru, v'amakum yeba ozro. Rav Chisda said, Rabbi Huda Nasi said this thing, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu supports him in it. What is this? Lo shana b'makom echad. That's only true if there are many berries concentrated in one place. In other words, if you have so many berries concentrated in one place, that kiviyachol, you have more berries than leaves. But the berries are all concentrated in one place. But if the berries are diffused along the stalk, even if there are technically more berries than leaves, it doesn't invalidate the arava, the hadas. Amrli Rava says, Amad Beis. No. If you have berries that are different places on the stalk, the hadas is going to be possible for a different reason. It's called menumar. They'll say menumar means spotted. Because it's sprouting berries in different places, it's called menumar. So upasal ella iit marachi it. So say oshayu anav meru me'alav pasal. If there are more berries than leaves, the hadas will be pasal. So Rav Chisda said, Rabbeinu Agadol said this, and Kadosh Baruch Hu should support him in this. Lo shana ela anav shchoros. Oh, what type of berries are problematic? Blackberries. Aval anav of Yerokos mine hadas hu v'kasher. But if the berries are green, they actually don't invalidate the hadas. Shabbos makes sense. If the berries are black, they stand out and are clearly again take away from the beauty of the hadas. If it's green berries, they go ahead and they fit with the rest of the hadas, and therefore, even if you have many of those berries, they do not detract from the kashrus of the stalk. Incredible. Amra Papa, adumos kishchoros damyon. Red berries are like blackberries, meaning that the presence of red berries would go ahead and invalidate the hadas. So the Gemara says, Da Amra Bichanina, Hai Dam Shachar Adamhu Ela Shalaka. Interesting raya. The Gemara brings a raya from Hilchos Nida. Hilchos Nida, we know that red blood is dam nida, is nida blood. So the Gemara says, by the way, so is black, because at the end of the day, black shachar is adamu shalaka. Black and red are considered to be in halacha the same family. Literally, black blood is red blood, that laka that was afflicted. So again, the Gemara is just making the same equation from red to black by nida is the same halacha with red to black by the berries of the hadas. Good. Imiyatan kasher, if you went ahead and you diminish the number of berries, ultimately, again, the hadas will be kosher. So, demantinu emas, when are you diminishing the number of berries? In other words, when are you doing that? If you're removing the berries from the branch before you put everything in the bundle, then of course it's going to be kosher. What's the shaila? Oh, no, so what are you doing? You bundled everything, and then you realize what? This is a problem with not opening your hadassah until Yom Tov morning, right? What happens? You realize, so many berries. You bundled everything, and now you have to pick off the berries. So the Gemara says, but one second, now we're back to our sugya of dichui. Once you went ahead and you bundled it and it was set aside for non-use, does the act of removing the berries, once the stalk has been bundled, rectify its status? Ultimately, again, so see from here that what? That just because something was initially rejected doesn't mean it remains forever rejected. And Allah Lamaisa, once you rectify the berry situation, the hadas is good, even if it was already bundled with the lulav and the aravas. To which the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. The olam basar da'agde, the kasavar eget hazmana ba'amahu, ve'ein ve'ishu, v'hazmana ba'ama lav klumu. Maybe not. Maybe at the end of the day, the act of bundling the hadas with the lulav and the arava is not the mitzvah, it's the hazmana, it's the preparation. And therefore, again, it's only preparing it for use. But it hasn't been actively used yet. Because it hasn't been actively used, removing the berries any time before active use is going to go ahead and be fine and does not even get into the discussion regarding dichoy or not. Ve'in mamatim b'yamtiv. So the Gemara says, we'll do one more line, then we'll have to stop. And you cannot go ahead and diminish the berries on yamtiv. Ha'avar v'liktan mai. What happens if you went ahead and you did diminish the berries? What happens then? So kosher. Ultimately, again, it's kosher. So obviously, we'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up Emirat Hashem at this 2 dots tomorrow. It's a short daf sometime soon. Okay, good. Beautiful, beautiful daf together. I'm sorry? I think so.